a millionaire businessman returns to his mansion and discovers signs of neglect in his own son. The shock intensifies when he catches the boy eating pet food, revealing a secret of fear and pain. The stepmother tries to justify it coldly, but what the man discovers is shocking. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The electric hum of the Tesla echoed through the marble garage as Jonathan Mitchell pulled in earlier than expected. His phone was still pressed against his ear, his voice crisp and decisive, as he finalized the acquisition of a promising tech startup. The numbers were good, the projections even better. Another successful deal to add to his portfolio. At 42, Jonathan had built an empire from the ground up, transforming a small software company into a multinational corporation worth hundreds of millions. Success had always come naturally to him, a series of calculated risks that paid off handsomely. He stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. The mansion was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, almost oppressive. Victoria must be out at one of her charity events or shopping expeditions. His wife had a talent for filling her days with social obligations that kept her perpetually busy. Jonathan loosened his tie as he walked through the grand foyer, past the sweeping staircase and into the hallway that led to the kitchen. The house had cost him $8 million, a sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, with 12 bedrooms, a home theater, an indoor pool, and grounds that stretched across 5 acres. It was the kind of home that appeared in architectural magazines, all clean lines and expensive taste. Victoria had insisted on it when they married 2 years ago, claiming that Daniel needed space to grow, that the boy deserved the best. At the time, Jonathan had been grateful for her apparent concern for his son, Daniel. The thought of his 7-year-old boy made Jonathan's chest tighten with a familiar mixture of love and guilt. Since Sarah's passing 3 years ago, Jonathan had thrown himself into work with an almost manic intensity. It was easier to lose himself in quarterly reports and business strategies than to face the gaping hole his wife's absence had left in their lives. Daniel had been only 4 when he lost his mother, too young to fully understand, old enough to feel the devastating loss. Victoria had entered their lives 18 months after Sarah's passing. Elegant, sophisticated, and charming, she had seemed like a gift. She was attentive to Daniel, or so Jonathan had believed, and she understood the demands of his career. The wedding had been a quiet affair, just close family and a few friends. Jonathan had convinced himself he was doing the right thing, giving Daniel a mother figure, creating a stable home. Now, walking through the darkened kitchen, Jonathan felt the first stirrings of unease. The house was too quiet, too still. Where was Daniel? It was past 7 in the evening. The boy should have been having dinner or doing homework or watching television in the family room. Then he heard it. A small sound, barely audible, coming from the direction of the pantry. A shuffling, almost furtive noise that didn't belong in the pristine silence of the house. Jonathan moved toward the sound, his businessman's instincts suddenly on high alert. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the tightness of his shoulders, the way his pulse quickened. He pushed open the pantry door and froze. There, crouched on the floor next to the dog's bowls, was Daniel. His small hands were cupped, bringing kibble to his mouth. The boy was eating the dog food, his thin frame hunched over the ceramic bowl as if protecting his find. His clothes hung loosely on his body, and in the dim light filtering in from the kitchen, Jonathan could see how gaunt his son had become. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Jonathan's brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. This was his son, his boy, eating dog food on the kitchen floor like a starving animal. Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes wide with terror. Tears immediately began streaming down his pale cheeks, and he scrambled backward, the kibble scattering across the floor. "Daddy?" The word came out as a broken whisper. "Please don't tell Auntie Victoria. Please, please don't tell her." The way Daniel said Auntie Victoria sent a chill down Jonathan's spine. There was pure fear in the boy's voice, a terror that no child should feel in their own home. Jonathan dropped to his knees, his expensive suit forgotten as he reached for his son. "Danny, what are you doing? Why are you eating this?" The boy flinched away from his touch, and that small gesture hit Jonathan harder than any business failure ever had. His son was afraid of him, of the consequences. The realization was like a physical blow. "I was hungry," Daniel whispered, his voice so small, so defeated. "I didn't mean to be bad. I know dinner isn't until later, but my tummy hurt so much." Jonathan's hands were shaking as he gently cupped Daniel's face. The boy was thin. How had he not noticed? When was the last time he'd really looked at his son, really spent time with him? The guilt crashed over him like a wave. "You're not bad, Danny. You're never bad. Come here, let's get you some real food." But before Jonathan could stand, he heard the click of heels on the marble floor. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her designer dress immaculate, her makeup perfect. She took in the scene with a quick, assessing glance, and Jonathan saw something flicker across her face. Annoyance? Calculation? It was gone too quickly to identify. "Jonathan, you're home early." Her voice was smooth, controlled. "What's going on here?" Jonathan stood, positioning himself between Victoria and Daniel. "I found our son eating dog food, Victoria. Eating dog food because he was hungry." Victoria's laugh was light, dismissive. "Oh, that. Daniel has this little problem with discipline. He refuses to eat at proper meal times, always wanting snacks and treats at all hours. I've been trying to teach him structure, that food comes at designated times." Jonathan looked down at Daniel, who had pressed himself against the wall. His eyes locked on Victoria with undisguised fear. "He's 7 years old, Victoria. If he's hungry, he needs to eat." "He's manipulating you," Victoria said, her voice taking on a slight edge. "Shai does this for attention. The pediatrician said some children act out after trauma. He's testing boundaries." Something about her explanation felt off. Jonathan's business success had been built on his ability to read people, to detect when something didn't add up. And this didn't add up. "When did you speak to his pediatrician?" "Last month. I took him for his checkup. You were in Singapore, remember?" Jonathan did remember. He was always somewhere, always too busy, always prioritizing the next deal over his son. The guilt was suffocating. "I'm going to make Daniel something to eat," he said firmly. "Now," Victoria's smile was tight. "Of course. Whatever you think is best." As she turned to leave, Jonathan called after her. "Victoria, what's for dinner tonight?" "I prepared a lovely seafood risotto. It's in the warming drawer." Jonathan felt his blood run cold. "Daniel is allergic to seafood." Victoria paused, her back still to him. "Is he? I thought that was just shellfish. How silly of me. Well, I suppose he can have a sandwich instead." She left the kitchen, her heels clicking away into the depths of the house. Jonathan looked down at his son, really looked at him for the first time in months. The boy was trembling, his arms wrapped around his thin frame. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his skin had a pale, unhealthy cast. "Danny," Jonathan said softly, kneeling again, "has this happened before? Have you been hungry before?" Daniel's lower lip trembled. "I'm not supposed to tell. She said if I tell, you'll be angry with me. She said I'm the problem because I don't listen." "You can tell me anything, son. I promise I won't be angry with you. I need to know the truth." But Daniel just shook his head, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "Can I just have some food, Daddy, please?" Jonathan pulled his son into his arms, feeling the sharp edges of the boy's ribs through his shirt. "Yes, baby. You can have anything you want." As he stood, carrying Daniel toward the refrigerator, Jonathan's mind was racing. He had built a fortune by paying attention to details, by seeing patterns others missed. And now, looking at his frightened, malnourished son, he was seeing a pattern that made his blood run cold. Something was very, very wrong in his house. And he had been too blind, too absent to see it. That was about to change. Jonathan made Daniel a grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup, watching as the boy devoured the simple meal with desperate hunger that made his heart ache. He sat across from his son at the kitchen island, fighting the urge to bombard him with questions. Daniel needed to eat, needed to feel safe. The interrogation could wait. When the plate was empty, Daniel looked up at his father with something like wonder in his eyes. "Thank you, Daddy. You don't have to thank me for feeding you, Danny. That's what parents do." Jonathan's voice was thick with emotion. "Why don't we go upstairs? I want to spend some time with you." The walk to Daniel's bedroom on the second floor felt like a journey through a museum. Everything in the house was perfect, curated, expensive. Victoria had redecorated after their marriage, replacing Sarah's warm, lived-in aesthetic with something colder, more sophisticated. Jonathan had allowed it, too consumed with grief and work to care about throw pillows and paint colors. Daniel's room was at the end of the hall, a space that should have been a child's sanctuary. Jonathan pushed open the door and felt his stomach drop. The room was immaculate, too immaculate. The bed was made with military precision, the corners sharp and tight. Toys lined the shelves in perfect order, looking untouched, unloved. Everything had a place, and everything was in its place. It looked like a showroom, not the bedroom of a 7-year-old boy. Jonathan's eyes traveled around the space, cataloguing details he'd missed during his brief goodnight visits. No pictures on the walls, no crayon marks or stickers, no signs of play or creativity. The room felt sterile, devoid of the warmth and chaos that should characterize a child's space. Daniel went immediately to his bed, sitting on the edge with his hands folded in his lap, his posture unnaturally rigid for a child. "Danny, where are your drawings? You used to love to draw." The boy's eyes flickered toward the bookshelf. "I don't draw anymore." "Why not?" "Auntie Victoria says it makes a mess." Jonathan walked to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines of the books. They were all educational, appropriate, and completely joyless. Where were the picture? Books Sarah used to read to Daniel. Where were the silly stories about dragons and dinosaurs? Behind a row of mathematics workbooks, his hand touched something different. He pulled out a stack of papers, carefully hidden away. Drawings, Daniel's drawings, crumpled and smoothed out again, as if someone had thrown them away and the boy had rescued them. Jonathan spread them on the floor, his throat tightening as he looked at his son's artwork. They were disturbing in their honesty. Dark figures looming over small ones, a child alone in a room with a large door, scribbled clouds of black and grey. In one drawing, a stick figure with long hair had a red mouth open wide, while a tiny figure cowered in the corner. "Danny, who is this?" Jonathan pointed to the large figure. Daniel's voice was barely audible. "That's when Auntie Victoria gets angry." "And this?" He pointed to another drawing, where a small figure sat alone in what looked like a room. "That's my time-out place. Sometimes I have to stay there for a long time." Jonathan's hands were shaking. He forced himself to remain calm, to not let his rising fury show. "How long is a long time?" "I don't know." "Hours?" "Sometimes she forgets to let me out until you come home." The words hit Jonathan like physical blows. He'd been so blind, so willfully ignorant. All the signs had been there, if only he'd been present enough to see them. "Can you show me your time-out place?" Daniel pointed to his closet. Jonathan stood and opened the door. It was a walk-in closet, spacious but windowless. In the corner he saw a small blanket, a cup of water, and nothing else. His son had been locked in here, locked away like a prisoner in his own home. Jonathan's vision blurred with rage, but he forced it down. Daniel needed him to be strong, to be in control. "I'm so sorry, Danny. This is never going to happen again. Do you understand me? Never." The boy looked at him with eyes too old for his young face. "But Auntie Victoria says I need discipline. She says I'm difficult." "You're not difficult. You're a child, my child." Jonathan sat on the floor next to his son, pulling him close. "Has she hurt you?" Daniel hesitated, then slowly nodded. He pulled up the sleeve of his shirt, revealing small bruises on his upper arm, finger-shaped marks that made Jonathan's blood boil. "She grabs me sometimes when I don't listen fast enough." "Where else?" Daniel showed him more bruises, all in places that would be covered by clothing. Professional, calculated, Victoria had been careful. "Danny, have you been seeing your friends, going to play dates?" The boy shook his head. "Auntie Victoria says I need to focus on my studies. She says I'm behind the other kids and I can't waste time playing." Another lie. Daniel's teacher had sent home glowing reports about his academic progress. Jonathan had skimmed them, signed them, and filed them away without really reading them. "Do you go to the park? Play outside?" "Sometimes in the backyard, but only when you're home." Jonathan felt sick. His son had been isolated, controlled, systematically broken down, all while he'd been flying around the world, making money they didn't need. He gathered the drawings carefully, folding them with respect. "These are important, Danny. These are your voice. I'm going to keep them safe." Auntie Victoria threw them away. She said they were ugly. They're not ugly, they're honest, and they're going to help me make sure you're safe." Jonathan stood and began doing something he should have done months ago. He took the drawings and taped them to the walls, creating a gallery of his son's pain and fear, but also his resilience, his stubborn refusal to be completely silenced. Each piece of art was a testimony, a record of suffering that Jonathan had failed to prevent. As he worked, he noticed Daniel starting to relax, his rigid posture softening slightly. The room was beginning to look lived in, real. The sterile perfection was breaking down, replaced by something more honest. "Daddy, does this mean I can keep drawing?" "You can do anything you want, Danny. This is your room, your space. You're going to fill it with whatever makes you happy." But even as he said it, Jonathan knew that decorating a room wasn't enough. The problem wasn't the walls or the toys. The problem was Victoria, and the systematic abuse she'd been inflicting on his vulnerable child. He thought about the scene in the kitchen, the way Daniel had flinched from him, the terror in his voice when he'd begged Jonathan not to tell Auntie Victoria, the seafood risotto despite knowing about Daniel's allergy, the locked closet, the bruises, the isolation. This wasn't discipline gone too far. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty. Jonathan pulled out his phone and took pictures of the bruises, the drawings, the sterile room, the closet. Evidence. He was going to need evidence. "Danny, I need to ask you something important. When Auntie Victoria locked you in the closet, did she give you food?" The boy shook his head. "She said time out means no privileges. Food is a privilege if I'm bad. You're never bad enough to deserve that. No child is. That's not discipline, Danny, that's wrong. But she said Mom would be ashamed of me. She said Mom would be disappointed in how I turned out." The mention of Sarah made Jonathan's heart clench. Victoria had weaponized his late wife's memory, using it to manipulate and control a grieving child. "Your mother loved you more than anything in the world. She would never, ever be disappointed in you, and she would never want you to be treated this way." Daniel's tears came then, deep sobs that shook his small frame. Jonathan held him, letting him cry, feeling each sob like a knife to his own heart. How long had Daniel been holding this in? How many nights had he cried himself to sleep, believing he deserved this treatment? When the tears finally subsided, Jonathan helped Daniel change into his pajamas. The boy was embarrassingly thin, his ribs visible, his arms like twigs. Jonathan made a mental note to schedule a doctor's appointment first thing in the morning. "I'm going to stay with you until you fall asleep," Jonathan said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "And tomorrow we're going to start fixing things. Is Auntie Victoria going to be mad? Don't worry about Auntie Victoria. You let me handle her. Your only job is to be a kid, okay? To be happy and safe." As Daniel drifted off to sleep, Jonathan sat in the darkened room, his mind racing. He thought about Victoria, about the woman he'd married. Had she always been this way and he'd been too blind to see it? Or had something changed, some mask slipped away once she'd secured her position in his life and his home? He thought about the inheritance. Sarah had left Daniel a substantial trust fund, managed by Jonathan until the boy turned 18. Victoria had no access to it, but she'd asked about it several times, probing about amounts and terms with what he'd thought was natural curiosity. The prenuptial agreement had been Victoria's idea, actually. She'd insisted on it, claiming she wanted to prove she wasn't marrying him for money. At the time, Jonathan had been touched by the gesture. Now he wondered what other protections she'd built into that document, what clauses he'd signed without reading carefully enough. His phone buzzed with an email, another acquisition opportunity, another chance to expand his empire. Jonathan deleted it without reading. His empire could wait. His son couldn't. He had built his success on decisive action, on seeing problems and solving them quickly and efficiently. This was the most important problem he'd ever faced, and he couldn't afford to get it wrong. Tomorrow he would call Robert Carson, his family attorney. Tomorrow he would document everything, build a case, take action. But tonight he would stay here, keeping watch over his sleeping son, making up for all the nights he hadn't been there. The house settled around him, quiet except for Daniel's soft breathing. Somewhere downstairs, Victoria was probably in the master suite, secure in her position, confident in her control. That confidence was about to be shattered. Jonathan waited. until Daniel was deeply asleep before he made his way downstairs. The house felt different now, as if a veil had been lifted to reveal something rotten beneath the polished surface. Every expensive fixture, every piece of designer furniture seemed to mock him. What good was wealth if he couldn't protect his own child? He found Victoria in the formal dining room, a room they rarely used. She'd set the table with their finest china, the seafood risotto elegantly plated, alongside a crisp white wine. She'd changed into a different dress, something more fitted, more alluring. Candles flickered on the table. She looked up as he entered, her smile practiced and perfect. "I thought we could have a proper dinner, just the two of us. I'm sorry about the confusion earlier. Sometimes I forget about Daniel's dietary restrictions. You know how busy things get." Jonathan remained standing, his hands in his pockets to hide their shaking. "We need to talk about Daniel." "Of course," Victoria gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, have some wine." "Oh, you look tense." He didn't sit. "Why is my son so thin?" Victoria's smile flickered just for a moment. "He's naturally slight. Like you were at that age, or so you've told me." "I saw his ribs, Victoria. He's malnourished. That's dramatic. He eats perfectly well at mealtimes. The pediatrician said he's fine. Then I'll schedule another appointment and hear it myself." Jonathan watched her carefully, reading her reactions, the way he'd read hundreds of business adversaries across conference tables. "Why did you serve seafood tonight, when you know Daniel is allergic?" "I told you I forgot." "It's not deliberate." Her voice took on an edge of exasperation. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. One simple mistake and suddenly I'm the villain?" "It's not just tonight. The bruises on his arms, the locked closet, the fear in his eyes when he begged me not to tell you he was hungry." Victoria set down her wineglass with deliberate care. "Those bruises are from playing. Boys his age are clumsy, and the closet is a time-out space, Jonathan. Every parenting book recommends a quiet place for children to calm down when they misbehave. For hours at a time? Without food? He told you that." Victoria's laugh was sharp. "He's exaggerating, trying to get attention. Children do that, especially ones who've experienced trauma." "He's manipulating you, can't you see that?" Jonathan pulled out his phone, showing her the photos he'd taken. "These are his drawings, Victoria. Look at them. Really look at them." She glanced at the screen dismissively. "Dark scribbles. He has a morbid imagination. His therapist said it's normal for children processing grief." "What therapist?" "Daniel doesn't have a therapist." Victoria's expression shifted, a tiny crack in her composure. "I meant the school counselor. She mentioned it at the parent-teacher conference." "The conference I couldn't attend because I was in Tokyo, the one you went to alone." Jonathan's voice was cold now, all business. "What exactly did the counselor say?" "That Daniel is doing fine academically, but remains withdrawn socially. She suggested he's still adjusting to having a new mother figure." Every answer was smooth, rehearsed. But Jonathan had spent 20 years negotiating deals, spotting lies, finding weaknesses. Victoria was good, but she wasn't good enough. "Why doesn't Daniel have any friends over? Why doesn't he go to play dates?" "Because he's shy. He prefers to be alone. I've tried to arrange activities, but he refuses." "That's not what he told me." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "And you believe him over me? I've been here every single day while you've been jet-setting around the world. I've been the one managing this household, taking care of that child, and this is the thanks I get." The outburst was calculated, Jonathan realized. She was trying to put him on the defensive, to make him feel guilty for questioning her. "I'm not attacking you, Victoria. I'm trying to understand what's been happening in my own home while I've been away. What's been happening is that I've been trying to raise a well-adjusted child with structure and discipline, something his father is apparently too busy to provide." Her voice turned icy. "You want to know why Daniel is the way he is? Because you abandoned him. You buried yourself in work and left me to pick up the pieces." The words stung because they held a kernel of truth. Jonathan had abandoned his son in a way, but that didn't excuse what Victoria had done. "You're right. I haven't been present enough. That's on me. But locking a child in a closet isn't discipline, Victoria. Withholding food isn't structure. Those are abuse. Abuse." Her voice rose. "How dare you? I have done nothing but try to help that boy. He's difficult, Jonathan. He won't follow rules. He won't listen. He deliberately provokes me. He's 7 years older, and he needs to learn consequences. The world won't coddle him the way you do. The world won't starve him either. Victoria's expression shifted again, and suddenly there were tears in her eyes. The transformation was startling, immediate. I can't believe you're saying these things to me. I love that boy like he's my own. Yes, I've been strict sometimes, maybe too strict, but it's because I care. I want him to grow up to be strong and successful like his father. She moved toward Jonathan, her hand reaching for his arm. I'm sorry if I've been too rigid. I'll do better. We can work on this together. Please don't let a misunderstanding ruin what we've built. Her fingers trailed down his sleeve, her voice softening, becoming almost seductive. Come to bed. Let's talk about this in the morning when we're both calmer. You're jet-lagged and stressed. Everything will seem clearer after a good night's sleep. Jonathan stepped back out of her reach. For the first time, he saw Victoria clearly, without the fog of grief and loneliness that had clouded his judgment when they'd met. She was beautiful, polished, and completely calculating. Every tear, every gesture, every word was a performance designed to manipulate. You're not sleeping in our room tonight, he said quietly. You'll take the guest suite. The tears vanished instantly, replaced by cold fury. You're throwing me out of my own bedroom? It's my house, Victoria. My bedroom. And until we get this sorted out, I want you away from Daniel. You can't do this. I'm your wife, and he's my son. If I have to choose, there's no contest. Victoria's mask dropped completely. Her face hardened, her eyes turning glacial. You're making a mistake. A huge mistake. You have no idea what I've sacrificed for this family, for that ungrateful brat. Don't call him that. Why not? It's the truth. He's a burden, Jonathan. A constant reminder of your perfect dead wife. I've tried to make him better, to shape him into something worthwhile, and this is what I get. The venom in her voice was startling in its honesty. This was the real Victoria, the one she'd hidden behind charm and grace. Pack a bag. Take the guest suite. We'll discuss this further with lawyers present. Lawyers? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're threatening me with lawyers? Over a spoiled child's lies? He's not lying. Prove it. I have pictures. I have his drawings. I have his testimony. The ravings of a traumatized child with an overactive imagination. No court would listen to that over the word of his devoted stepmother. Victoria picked up her wineglass, her hand perfectly steady. You're not thinking clearly, Jonathan. You're letting emotion cloud your business judgment. Think about what a scandal would do to your company. The headlines. Tech mogul's messy divorce. Your shareholders would love that. I don't care about shareholders right now. You should, because I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of father you really are. Absent, neglectful, so consumed with making money that you didn't notice what was happening under your own roof. You think you'll come out of this looking good. There it was, the threat he'd been waiting for. Victoria wasn't going to go quietly. Do whatever you need to do, Jonathan said, but you're not going near my son. Victoria set down her glass and picked up her phone. I'm calling my lawyer. You'll be hearing from her in the morning. And Jonathan, you're going to regret this. She swept from the room, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. Jonathan heard her climbing the stairs, the slam of a door. He stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that suddenly felt meaningless. He pulled out his own phone and scrolled to Robert Carson's number. It was past 9, but this couldn't wait. Robert answered on the third ring, his voice concerned. John, everything okay? I need your help. Tonight, if possible. It's about Daniel. What happened? Jonathan's voice cracked slightly. I think my wife has been abusing my son, and I need to know how to protect him. There was a pause, then Robert's voice came back, all business. I'm on my way. Don't let her near the boy. Document everything. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Jonathan ended the call and sank into one of the dining room chairs. The candles Victoria had lit were still burning, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The seafood risotto was congealing on the fine china plates. The whole scene was a grotesque parody of domestic bliss. He thought about Daniel upstairs, finally sleeping peacefully, unaware that his world was about to change. Jonathan had promised to protect him, to make things right. Now he had to follow through, no matter the cost. Victoria was right about one thing. This was going to be messy. But Jonathan hadn't built his empire by backing down from difficult situations. He'd built it by facing problems head-on, by being willing to make hard choices. This was the hardest choice he'd ever faced, but also the simplest. His son's safety came first. Everything else was just noise. He pulled out his phone and began typing notes, documenting every detail of the evening, every concerning thing Daniel had said, every bruise he'd seen. The businessman in him knew that in any battle, preparation was everything. Victoria had declared war. She just didn't know yet that she'd already lost. Robert Carson arrived exactly 30 minutes later, his silver BMW pulling into the circular driveway. Jonathan met him at the door, grateful for the attorney's calm, professional presence. Robert was in his mid-50s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of steady demeanor that came from decades of handling family crises. He'd been Jonathan's lawyer since the early days of the company, handling everything from contracts to Sarah's estate. They sat in Jonathan's home office, a space Victoria rarely entered. Robert listened without interruption as Jonathan laid out everything he'd discovered, showing him the photos, the drawings, describing Daniel's fear and emaciation. When Jonathan finished, Robert was quiet for a moment, his expression grave. "This is serious, John. If what you're describing is accurate, we're looking at clear neglect, possibly physical abuse. The question is how to proceed without putting Daniel through more trauma. What are my options? First, we need a medical examination. Tomorrow morning. I know a pediatrician who specializes in cases like this. She'll document Daniel's physical condition, the bruises, the weight loss, everything. That becomes evidence. Victoria will fight this, of course she will. But we're going to build an airtight case. Medical records, psychological evaluation, witness statements. By the time we're done, there won't be any question about what's been happening. Witness statements? Who would testify? Teachers, neighbors, anyone who's interacted with Daniel regularly. We'll also want to check if Victoria dismissed any household staff recently. Abusers often isolate their victims by removing potential witnesses. Jonathan's mind went to Maria, the housekeeper who'd worked for them since Sarah was alive. Victoria had let her go 6 months ago, claiming she wanted to try a new cleaning service. At the time, Jonathan hadn't questioned it. Our old housekeeper, Maria Rodriguez. Victoria fired her. Do you have her contact information? Somewhere, yes. Sarah kept all that in her address book. Robert made a note. We'll want to talk to her. What about Daniel's school? Any concerns reported there? He's doing well academically, but Victoria said he's withdrawn socially. We'll request all records from the school, including any observations from teachers or counselors. Children who are being abused at home often show signs at school. Jonathan rubbed his face, exhaustion suddenly crashing over him. How did I miss this, Robert? How did I let it go on for so long? Don't go there, John. Abusers are skilled manipulators. Victoria isolated Daniel, controlled the narrative, and took advantage of your work schedule. The important thing is you know now and you're taking action. Victoria threatened to go public, to make this a scandal that damages the company. Robert's expression hardened. Let her try. If she goes to the media with this, she'll be admitting to abuse. That's a battle she can't win. And if she tries to paint you as the neglectful father, we'll counter with the fact that you took immediate action the moment you discovered the problem. She mentioned calling her lawyer. Good. Let her get representation. This needs to be handled formally. In the meantime, I'll file for an emergency protective order first thing in the morning. We'll also file for divorce and sole custody. The word divorce hung in the air. Jonathan had failed at marriage twice now, first through Sarah's passing, and now through his own blindness to Victoria's true nature. What about tonight? Should I make her leave? No. If you force her out without a court order, she could claim you're being hostile. But keep her away from Daniel. Sleep in his room if you have to. Don't leave them alone together. After Robert left, Jonathan checked on Daniel. The boy was still sleeping, but restlessly now, his small face scrunched in what might have been a bad dream. Jonathan gently stroked his son's hair, whispering reassurances until Daniel settled again. He was about to leave when he noticed something odd. On Daniel's desk, beneath a stack of textbooks, was the edge of what looked like a tablet. Jonathan carefully moved the books, revealing an old iPad, one of the earlier models that Jonathan had retired years ago. He'd assumed it had been recycled or donated. What was it doing hidden in Daniel's room? He picked it up, pressing the power button. The screen flickered to life, showing a low battery warning but still functional. There was no password, just a simple home screen with a few apps. Photos, notes, and voice memos. Jonathan's heart began to race. He opened voice memos and found dozens of recordings, each one labeled with just a date. The most recent was from 3 days ago. With trembling hands, he selected the first recording and pressed play, keeping the volume low so as not to wake Daniel. Static, then a small voice. Daniel's voice barely above a whisper. "It's Tuesday. Auntie Victoria locked me in the timeout place again because I spilled juice at breakfast. I didn't mean to. My hands were shaky because I was hungry. She said I can't come out until dinner time. But dinner isn't for 6 more hours. I'm really hungry. My tummy hurts." A sob caught in the recording, then silence. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. He selected another recording from 2 weeks earlier. "Auntie Victoria says I'm ungrateful. She made chicken with the green stuff I don't like, and I couldn't eat it because it makes me feel sick. She got really mad and said if I won't eat what she makes, I won't eat at all. She took my plate away and said, I can think about being grateful in my room. I'm locked in now. I wish Daddy was here. I wish Mommy was here. I miss Mommy so much." Recording after recording, each one a small piece of Daniel's suffering. Some were just dates and brief descriptions of punishments. Others were longer, rambling confessions of fear and loneliness. In several, Daniel could be heard crying. In one, he sang himself a lullaby that Sarah used to sing to him, his voice breaking. Then Jonathan found the recording that broke him completely. It was dated from a month ago. "Please, I'm so hungry. I'm sorry I was bad. I'm sorry I didn't finish my vegetables. Please let me out. I promise I'll be good. I promise I'll eat everything. Please, Auntie Victoria, please, my stomach hurts so much. I feel dizzy. Please, Daddy, please come home, please." The recording went on for nearly 10 minutes, Daniel's pleas becoming weaker, his voice hoarse from crying. At one point, he could be heard banging on the closet door, begging to be let out. Then just whimpering, and finally silence. Jonathan sat on the floor of Daniel's room, the tablet clutched in his hands, tears streaming down his face. His son had been documenting his own abuse, creating evidence of his suffering because he had no one else to tell. The recordings were Daniel's silent scream for help, captured in a device he'd hidden away like a secret diary. How many times had Jonathan come home, kissed Daniel goodnight, and left again for another business trip, completely unaware that his son was being systematically tormented? How many times had Daniel wanted to tell him but been too afraid? He forced himself to listen to more recordings, each one adding to the picture of calculated cruelty. Victoria had been careful to time her punishments for when Jonathan was away or distracted. She'd been strategic about the abuse, leaving marks where they wouldn't be visible, crafting explanations that sounded reasonable. But she hadn't counted on Daniel finding a way to preserve the truth. Jonathan carefully downloaded all the recordings to his phone, creating backups on his computer and cloud storage. This evidence was going to bury Victoria. There was no talking her way out of the child's own voice describing his suffering. He looked at his sleeping son with a mixture of heartbreak and fierce pride. Daniel had been so much stronger than anyone had given him credit for. In his own way, he'd been fighting back, documenting the abuse, keeping a record even when he felt powerless. Jonathan gently placed the tablet back where he'd found it, not wanting Daniel to wake up and feel exposed or ashamed. Tomorrow they would talk about the recordings. Tonight, Jonathan would just keep watch. He pulled a chair close to Daniel's bed and settled in for a long night. Every so often, Daniel would stir, and Jonathan would reach out to touch his shoulder, reassuring him with his presence. The boy would settle again, seeming to sense that he was protected. Around 2 in the morning, Jonathan heard footsteps in the hallway. Victoria. She paused outside Daniel's door, and Jonathan tensed, ready to intervene if she tried to enter. But after a moment, the footsteps continued down the hall to the guest suite. Jonathan pulled out his phone and sent a text to Robert, even though he knew the attorney was likely asleep. He needed to get this out while the rage and grief were fresh. Found recordings. Daniel documented everything. Voice memos of him begging for food, crying while locked in closet. It's worse than I thought. Much worse. The phone buzzed almost immediately. Robert must have been awake too. Don't delete anything. Don't alter anything. That's powerful evidence. We meet with Dr. Patterson at 9 a.m. Bring the tablet. And John, you're doing the right thing. That boy is lucky to have you. Jonathan wasn't so sure about that last part. If he'd been any kind of decent father, this never would have happened in the first place. But he couldn't change the past. He could only try to make the future better. As dawn began to break through Daniel's window, painting the room in shades of grey and gold, Jonathan made himself a promise. He would be present from now on. He would put his son first always. He would rebuild the trust that had been shattered, prove to Daniel that he was safe and loved and valued. The company could survive without his constant attention. Daniel couldn't. When the boy finally stirred awake, his eyes widening in surprise to see his father still there, Jonathan smiled despite his exhaustion. "Good morning, buddy. How do you feel about pancakes for breakfast?" Daniel's answering smile was tentative but real. "Really, with chocolate chips?" "With as many chocolate chips as you want." As they headed downstairs together, Jonathan's hand protectively on Daniel's shoulder, he felt the weight of the fight ahead. Victoria wasn't going to surrender quietly. There would be lawyers, hearings, possibly media attention. It was going to be ugly. But looking down at his son, seeing the hope beginning to return to those young eyes, Jonathan knew it would be worth it. Every battle, every headline, every difficult moment would be worth it if it meant Daniel could be a child again, safe and happy in his own home. The war had just begun, but Jonathan had no intention of losing. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Jonathan mixed chocolate chips into pancake batter. Daniel sat at the counter, swinging his legs, watching his father with an expression that mixed wonder and disbelief. It was such a simple moment, making breakfast together, but it felt revolutionary after months of rigid control and deprivation. "Can I help?" Daniel asked tentatively. "Absolutely. Come here, you can pour the batter into the pan." As Daniel carefully poured circles of batter onto the griddle, his concentration absolute, Jonathan heard the click of heels on the stairs. Victoria appeared in the doorway, immaculately dressed despite the early hour, her makeup perfect, not a hair out of place. She looked like she was heading to a board meeting, not facing the collapse of her marriage. "Good morning," she said coolly, her eyes flicking between Jonathan and Daniel. "I didn't realize we were having a cooking session." "We're making breakfast," Jonathan replied, his tone neutral. "Would you like some coffee?" "I'll get it myself." Victoria poured a cup from the machine, her movements precise and controlled. "Daniel, sweetheart, don't you have homework to finish before school?" Daniel's shoulders tensed and he looked up at his father uncertainly. "It's fine, Danny. Finish helping me with breakfast." Victoria's smile was tight. "I'm just thinking about his education. But of course, if you want him to fall behind, that's your choice. His homework is done. I checked last night." The tension in the kitchen was thick enough to cut. Victoria leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee, watching them with an expression Jonathan couldn't quite read. Was it anger? Resentment? Or something colder, more calculating? "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about our conversation last night. You were right. I have been too strict with Daniel. I let my desire for him to succeed override my compassion. I'd like to apologize." She moved toward Daniel, but Jonathan stepped between them. "That's not necessary right now." Victoria's eyes flashed. "I'm trying to make amends, Jonathan. Isn't that what you wanted?" "What I want is for Daniel to finish his breakfast in peace. We can discuss everything else later." "With lawyers present, you mean? Is that really necessary? Can't we handle this as a family?" "I think we're past that point." Victoria set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "You're making a terrible mistake. But I can see you're determined to go through with this circus. Fine, my attorney will be in touch. In the meantime, I'll be staying with friends. I assume you have no objection to me packing some things." "Tayati, pack whatever you need. Just don't go near Daniel's room." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't worry. I have no desire to be anywhere near the ungrateful little liar." Daniel flinched at the words, and Jonathan felt his protective rage spike. "Leave now." Victoria picked up her purse and walked to the door, then paused. "You know what's funny, Jonathan? I actually thought I could make this work. I thought I could tolerate that child for the sake of your money and status. But he made it impossible. Always whining, always needing attention, always getting in the way. You want to know the truth? I'll be relieved to be rid of him. Get out of my house." After Victoria left, the silence in the kitchen felt heavy. Daniel stared at his pancakes, no longer hungry, his thin shoulders hunched. "She's wrong, Danny. You're not ungrateful or a liar. You're brave and strong, and I'm so proud of you." "She hates me," Daniel whispered. "She has problems that have nothing to do with you. Sometimes adults are broken in ways that make them hurt people who don't deserve it. That's her issue, not yours." Jonathan served the pancakes, and though Daniel only managed to eat half, it was more than he'd probably eaten in days. Small steps. At 9 o'clock they met Robert Carson at Dr. Helen Patterson's office. The pediatrician was a woman in her late 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Daniel at ease. Her office was decorated with colorful murals and toys, nothing clinical or frightening. "Hi, Daniel," she said, crouching down to his level. "My name is Dr. Helen. Your dad asked me to do a checkup on you today. Is that okay?" Daniel nodded, looking to Jonathan for reassurance. "I'll be right here the whole time," Jonathan promised. The examination was thorough. Dr. Patterson measured and weighed Daniel, her expression growing more concerned as she recorded the numbers. She examined the bruises, taking photographs with Daniel's permission, noting their locations and patterns. She listened to his heart and lungs, checked his reflexes, looked in his ears and throat. "Daniel," she said gently, "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to tell me the truth, okay? You're not in trouble, no matter what you say." She asked about meals, about sleep, about pain. Daniel answered in a small voice, his eyes downcast. Yes, he'd been hungry a lot. Yes, sometimes he wasn't given dinner if he misbehaved. Yes, the bruises hurt when they first appeared. Yes, he'd been locked in his closet for hours. Dr. Patterson's professional composure never wavered, but Jonathan could see the anger in the tightness of her jaw, the way her pen pressed a little harder against her clipboard. After the examination, while Daniel played with toys in the waiting room, under the supervision of a nurse, Dr. Patterson sat down with Jonathan and Robert in her office. "That child is malnourished," she said bluntly. "He's in the 5th percentile for weight, down from the 60th percentile at his last checkup 8 months ago. He's lost almost 10 pounds, which is significant for a child his size. The bruising is consistent with restraint injuries. Someone has been grabbing him hard enough to leave marks." She pulled out a folder containing her notes and photos. "The pattern of neglect is clear. Restricted food access, isolation, physical restraint. This is systematic abuse, not poor parenting. I'm legally required to report this to Child Protective Services." "We expected that," Robert said. "In fact, we welcome it. The more official documentation we have, the better." "What about psychological damage?" Jonathan asked, his voice rough. "That will require evaluation by a child psychologist. But based on what I've observed, Daniel shows classic signs of trauma. Hypervigilance, people-pleasing behavior, fear of making mistakes. He's been living in a state of chronic stress." The words hit Jonathan like physical blows. His son had been traumatized, systematically broken down, while Jonathan had been closing business deals and accumulating wealth that meant nothing if it couldn't protect the person who mattered most. "Can he recover?" Jonathan asked. "Children are resilient. With proper support, therapy, and a safe environment, yes, he can recover. But it will take time. This isn't something that can be fixed overnight." After leaving Dr. Patterson's office, Jonathan took Daniel to his favorite ice cream shop, a small place in downtown Greenwich that Sarah used to take him to. Daniel ordered a chocolate cone and actually smiled as he ate it, the simple pleasure of a treat bringing light to his face. They were sitting at a sidewalk table when Jonathan's phone rang. "Robert Carson, John, we have a problem. Victoria's attorney just filed a counter-petition. She's claiming you're an unfit father due to chronic absence and neglect. She's requesting custody of Daniel and spousal support." Jonathan's hand tightened on his phone. "She can't be serious." "She is. And there's more. She's given an interview to Connecticut Magazine. It's going to run in their online edition this afternoon. The headline is something like, 'Tech mogul's wife speaks out, the cost of ambition.' She's going public already. She's trying to control the narrative, make herself look like the devoted stepmother, dealing with an absentee father. We need to respond carefully. What do you recommend? Don't engage with the media." "Not yet. Let her talk. Everything she says can be used against her, especially once we present the medical evidence and recordings. The court won't care about magazine interviews when they hear Daniel's voice begging for food." After hanging up, Jonathan looked at his son, who was happily finishing his ice cream, unaware of the battle being waged around him. He made a decision then, Whatever Victoria threw at him, whatever headlines appeared, whatever rumors spread through Greenwich's social circles, he would not let it touch Daniel. The boy had suffered enough. His phone buzzed with notifications. The article was already up. Against his better judgment, Jonathan opened it. The piece was masterful in its manipulation. Victoria portrayed herself as a woman who'd fallen in love with a widower and tried to mother his troubled child. She spoke of Jonathan's constant absences, the business trips that lasted weeks, the way he'd delegated parenting to staff and stepmother. She mentioned Daniel's behavioral issues and selective eating, painting a picture of a difficult child and an overwhelmed caregiver doing her best. There was a photo of Victoria looking elegant and sympathetic, seated in what appeared to be a lawyer's office. The article stopped short of direct accusations, but the implications were clear. Jonathan Mitchell was too focused on building his empire to notice what was happening in his own home. The worst part was that some of it was true. He had been absent. He had prioritized work over presence. Those facts gave her lies credibility. His phone began ringing. His assistant, his business partner, his mother, friends and colleagues. Everyone had seen the article. Everyone wanted to know what was really going on. Jonathan turned off his phone. "Daddy, are you okay?" Daniel was watching him with worried eyes. "I'm fine, buddy. Just some work stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." But Daniel was 7, not stupid. Is Auntie Victoria telling people bad things about us? Some people are going to say things that aren't true, but we know the truth, right? And that's what matters. Will I have to go back to her? The fear in Daniel's voice made Jonathan's decision easy. "Never. I promise you, never. You're staying with me." That afternoon, Child Protective Services came to the house. A social worker named Jennifer Martinez conducted an interview with Daniel while Jonathan waited in another room, anxiety eating at him. What if Daniel was too scared to tell the truth? What if the social worker didn't believe him? But when Jennifer emerged an hour later, her expression was grim. "Mr. Mitchell, I've heard some deeply concerning things today. I'm going to recommend that we open a formal investigation into Mrs. Mitchell's treatment of your son. In the meantime, I'd like to do a home assessment and speak with anyone else who has regular contact with Daniel." "His school," Jonathan said. "His teacher, Mrs. Chen. She's known him for 2 years. We'll be in touch with the school. I'd also like to schedule a follow-up visit to observe the home environment and your interaction with Daniel. We need to ensure he's in a safe, stable situation." "Of course, whatever you need." After Jennifer left, Jonathan found Daniel in his room, sitting on his bed with one of the drawings he'd rescued from the trash. The boy looked small and lost. "Hey," Jonathan said softly, sitting next to him. "How are you doing?" "The lady asked me a lot of questions." "Did you tell her the truth?" Daniel nodded. "Was that okay?" "That was perfect. You did exactly right." Jonathan pulled his son close. "I know this is scary and confusing, but all these people, the doctors and lawyers and social workers, they're all trying to help make sure you're safe. That's all any of us want." "I don't want to make trouble." "You're not making trouble. You're telling the truth. There's a difference." As they sat together, Jonathan felt the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. He'd failed Daniel once by being absent. He couldn't fail him again. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would see this through. His son deserved nothing less than complete protection and unwavering advocacy. The fight was just beginning, but Jonathan was ready. 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Jonathan cancelled his upcoming business trips, delegated urgent matters to his executive team, and cleared his schedule. For the first time in years, his son was his priority. They established a routine: breakfast together, drive to school, pick up in the afternoon, homework at the kitchen table, dinner, bath time, and stories before bed. Simple, normal activities that should have been happening all along. Daniel was slowly coming back to life. He still startled easily, still asked permission for things that should have been automatic, still ate like someone who expected food to be taken away. But there were glimmers of the boy he'd been before Victoria: a laugh at a silly joke, a request to play a board game, a drawing that wasn't dark and frightening, but showed a house with 2 stick figures labelled "Me and Daddy." On the 4th morning, Robert called with news. "We need to meet. Victoria's attorney has made a move and it's not what we expected." They met at Robert's office in downtown Greenwich, a suite of rooms that managed to feel both professional and comfortable. Robert spread documents across his conference table, his expression troubled. "Victoria is claiming she has evidence that could seriously damage your reputation. She's suggesting that unless you're willing to negotiate custody arrangements that give her continued access to Daniel, she'll release information about certain business dealings from years ago." Jonathan felt his stomach drop. "What business dealings?" "She's being vague, but her attorney mentioned something about an acquisition back in 2019, the startup you purchased in Seattle, TechFlow Solutions. Do you remember the circumstances?" Jonathan did remember, and his blood ran cold. TechFlow had been a promising company, with proprietary software that Jonathan's company needed. The acquisition had been aggressive, bordering on hostile. There had been questions about how Jonathan had obtained certain information about TechFlow's financial vulnerabilities, information that had allowed him to pressure the founders into selling at a fraction of what the company was worth. "There were allegations," Jonathan said slowly, "that we'd engaged in industrial espionage, corporate spying. Nothing was ever proven, and the founders signed NDAs as part of the settlement. Victoria claims to have emails and documents that prove your involvement. She's saying she has evidence that could expose you to legal action and public scandal." "How would she have access to that?" "She's been in your home, Jonathan, your office, your computers. If she was smart and patient, she could have copied files without you noticing." Jonathan ran his hands through his hair. He'd been so careful back then using intermediaries, keeping his own fingerprints off the questionable activities. But if Victoria had been digging through his archives, if she'd found the communications he'd thought were securely deleted, she could indeed have the ammunition to destroy him. "She's blackmailing me," he said flatly. "Give her access to my son or she ruins me." That's essentially what she's proposing. Her attorney couched it in terms of protecting the family's reputation and finding an amicable solution. But yes, it's blackmail. Jonathan thought about TechFlow, about the 3 founders who'd been forced to sell their life's work for pennies on the dollar. He thought about the aggressive tactics he'd employed, the moral lines he'd crossed in pursuit of success. He'd justified it at the time as just business, the kind of ruthless competitiveness required to build an empire. Now those chickens were coming home to roost, and his son was caught in the crossfire. What are my options? Legally, if she releases privileged information, she's committing a breach of privacy. We can sue, but the damage would already be done. Once that information is public, your reputation takes a hit regardless of the legal outcome. Your board might lose confidence. Shareholders could demand changes. Your competitors would have a field day. What's she asking for? Robert pulled out a document. Joint custody with alternating weeks. She wants to remain in the house with Daniel when it's her custody time. She wants $50,000 a month in spousal support, and she wants you to drop all allegations of abuse. Absolutely not. She's not getting access to Daniel. I don't care what it costs me. John, think about this carefully. If she releases this information, it could destroy everything you've built. Your company, your reputation, your standing in the community. That's a high price to pay. My son is not negotiable. Jonathan's voice was steel. I will not put him back in that woman's custody for even one day. If she wants to burn me down, let her try. Robert studied him for a long moment. You're sure about this? Once you refuse her terms, there's no going back. She'll release everything she has. I'm sure. My son's safety is worth more than my reputation. All right, I'll convey your response. But prepare yourself, John. This is going to get ugly. That night, Jonathan sat with Daniel after dinner, trying to find the right words to explain what was coming. Danny, you know how Auntie Victoria is very angry right now. Daniel nodded, his eyes wide. She might say some things about me that aren't nice, things that might be on the news or in the newspaper. I want you to know that no matter what she says, I love you, and I'm not going anywhere. Is she going to make you go away? No one can make me go away from you, I promise. But Daniel looked unconvinced, and Jonathan couldn't blame him. The boy had lost his mother, been betrayed by his stepmother. Why should he believe his father would be any different? Danny, I found something in your room. The tablet with the recordings. Daniel's face went white. I'm sorry. I know I wasn't supposed to use it. Please don't be mad. I'm not mad. Not at all. Those recordings are proof of what happened to you. They show that you were telling the truth. Oh, you were so brave to make them. Really? Daniel's voice was small and uncertain. Really? In fact, those recordings are going to help make sure you never have to go back to Auntie Victoria. They're proof that what she did was wrong. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing this. Will other people hear them? Maybe. The judge might need to hear them. Is that okay with you? The boy thought about it, then nodded slowly. If it helps him, it will help. I promise. 2 days later, the story broke. Someone, presumably Victoria, had leaked documents to a business news outlet. The headlines were devastating. Tech mogul accused of corporate espionage, and how Jonathan Mitchell really built his empire. The articles detailed the TechFlow acquisition, painting Jonathan as a ruthless operator who'd stolen proprietary information and bullied founders into an unfair deal. The fallout was immediate. Jonathan's stock price dropped 15% in a single day. His board called an emergency meeting. Business partners distanced themselves. The TechFlow founders, released from their NDAs by Victoria's leak, gave interviews describing Jonathan as predatory and unethical. Jonathan's phone rang constantly with calls from investors, colleagues, and media representatives. His email overflowed with messages ranging from supportive to scathing. But he ignored all of it, focusing instead on Daniel. Daddy, people at school were talking, Daniel said that afternoon, his face anxious. They said you did bad things. I did make some mistakes in business, Jonathan admitted. I wasn't always as fair or kind as I should have been. Sometimes I hurt people to get what I wanted. That was wrong and I'm sorry for it. Are you in trouble? Maybe. But whatever happens, it doesn't change how much I love you or how important you are to me. That evening, Robert called with more news. The board wants you to step down as CEO pending an investigation. They're worried about liability and reputation damage. Let them investigate. I'll cooperate fully. There's something else. Victoria's attorney has scheduled a press conference for tomorrow. She's going to present her side of the story publicly. Jonathan felt a surge of anger. She's turning this into a media circus. She thinks public opinion will help her case, show her as the victim of a powerful, unethical man. It's actually a risky move on her part. The more public this becomes, the more scrutiny she'll face too. Good. Let everyone see what kind of person she really is. But that night, lying in bed unable to sleep, Jonathan felt the weight of his choices crushing down on him. He had cut corners, hurt people, prioritized profit over principle. He'd been so focused on building success that he'd lost sight of what really mattered, and now his son was paying the price for his moral compromises. Around midnight, Daniel appeared in his doorway, clutching a stuffed bear that had been Sarah's gift years ago. I had a bad dream, the boy whispered. Come here, buddy. Daniel climbed into bed next to him, and Jonathan wrapped his arms around his son's small frame, feeling the steady beat of the child's heart against his chest. Daddy, even if you did bad things, I still love you. You're still my daddy. The words broke something in Jonathan. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he held his son close. I love you too, Danny, so much, and I'm going to do better. I'm going to be the father you deserve. You already are, Daniel murmured, already drifting back to sleep. As his son slept peacefully beside him, Jonathan made a vow. Victoria could destroy his business reputation, could cost him his company, could turn him into a pariah in the business community. He would pay whatever price necessary. But she would never ever get her hands on Daniel again. Some things were worth more than success, more than wealth, more than reputation. His son's safety and happiness topped that list. The next morning would bring Victoria's press conference, more headlines, more damage to his carefully constructed empire. But Jonathan faced it without fear. He'd made his choice. He'd chosen his son over everything else. And unlike the TechFlow deal, unlike all the other compromises and moral shortcuts of his career, this was a decision he would never regret. The empire he'd built might crumble, but the relationship he was rebuilding with Daniel would stand firm. That was the only legacy that really mattered. Victoria's press conference was held at a luxury hotel in downtown Greenwich, the kind of venue that suggested importance and credibility. Jonathan watched it on his laptop while Daniel was at school, forcing himself to witness Victoria's performance. She looked impeccable, dressed in a tasteful navy suit, her hair and makeup perfect. She sat at a table with her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Blackwell, who specialized in high-profile divorces. The room was full of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones crowding the table. "I want to start by saying that I love my stepson very much," Victoria began, her voice quavering slightly, her eyes glistening with what might have been tears. "Everything I've done has been out of concern for his well-being. Being a stepmother is challenging, especially to a child who has experienced such tremendous loss. I tried my best, but it was never enough for a man who was rarely home to see the reality of our daily struggles." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, a gesture that struck Jonathan as calculated. "When I married Jonathan, I knew he was driven and ambitious. I respected that, but I didn't realize how completely his work would consume him, leaving me alone to manage a grieving, difficult child with virtually no support." The reporters scribbled notes. Cameras zoomed in on Victoria's face. She was good at this, Jonathan had to admit. She'd turned herself into the sympathetic figure, the overwhelmed stepmother doing her best in impossible circumstances. "The allegations being made against me are deeply hurtful and completely false," Victoria continued. "I provided structure and discipline, yes, but always within the bounds of appropriate parenting. Daniel is a sweet boy but prone to exaggeration and attention-seeking behavior, something his therapists have documented." Another lie. Daniel had never seen a therapist during Victoria's tenure. As for my husband's recent accusations, they only emerged after I discovered certain troubling information about his business practices. Information that, as his wife, I felt morally obligated to bring to light. I never intended to create a public scandal, but when faced with false accusations, I had to defend myself. She was painting Jonathan as a vindictive husband trying to silence her whistleblowing. It was masterful manipulation, and Jonathan could see how some people might believe it. The press conference continued with questions from reporters. Victoria fielded them with practiced ease, always sounding reasonable, always presenting herself as the victim. When asked about the medical reports documenting Daniel's malnutrition and bruising, she claimed they were being misinterpreted, that Daniel had always been a picky eater and an active child prone to normal childhood injuries. Jonathan closed his laptop, feeling sick. This was the battle he'd chosen, but watching Victoria twist the truth so effortlessly was enraging. His phone rang. "Robert Carson. Did you watch it?" "Unfortunately, yes. Don't worry. She's overplaying her hand. The more she talks, the more inconsistencies appear. And we're about to present evidence that will blow her narrative apart." "What evidence?" "For starters, I tracked down Maria Rodriguez, your former housekeeper. She's agreed to give a deposition, and you're not going to believe what she has to say." They met Maria at Robert's office that afternoon. The woman was in her 50s, round and warm, with kind eyes that teared up when she saw Jonathan. "Mr. Mitchell, I am so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I should have told you what I saw. Maria, please, just tell me the truth now." "That's all I need." She nodded, twisting a tissue in her hands. "Mrs. Mitchell, she fired me 6 months ago. She said the house needed less staff, that she preferred a cleaning service. But I knew the real reason. I had seen too much." "What did you see?" "I saw her lock Daniel in his room for hours. I heard him crying, banging on the door, begging to be let out. One time I tried to let him out, and she caught me. She said I was undermining her authority, that Daniel needed to learn consequences. She said if I interfered again, she would make sure I never worked in Greenwich again." Maria's voice broke. "I have a family to support, Mr. Mitchell. I was afraid. I'm ashamed of my fear, but I was afraid. I understand. What else did you see?" "The meals. She would make Daniel eat at the kitchen table alone, while she ate in the dining room. If he didn't finish everything on his plate exactly as she wanted, she would take the food away and say he couldn't eat until the next meal. Sometimes she would put foods on his plate that she knew he couldn't eat, his allergies or foods that made him sick, and then punish him when he couldn't finish." Robert was taking notes, recording Maria's statement. "Did you ever see physical abuse?" I saw her grab him hard enough to leave marks. I saw her push him. One time I found him in the backyard eating berries from the bushes because he was so hungry. He begged me not to tell her. Another time, I found him eating fruit that had fallen from the trees. A 7-year-old child eating from the ground because he was starving in a house full of food. Jonathan felt tears burning in his eyes. Why didn't any of the other staff report this? There was no other staff, Mr. Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell got rid of everyone except the gardener, and he only comes twice a week. She wanted no witnesses. She was very careful about that. Did Daniel ever try to tell you what was happening? Maria nodded, wiping her eyes. Once he asked me if I could call you. He said he missed you and wanted you to come home. Mrs. Mitchell overheard and told him that bothering you with complaints would make you angry, that you might send him away to boarding school if he was too much trouble. The poor child was terrified. Robert leaned forward. Maria, would you be willing to testify to all of this in court? Yes, I should have spoken up sooner. I will not stay silent anymore. After Maria left, Robert looked at Jonathan with something like triumph in his eyes. That's the kind of testimony that changes cases. A neutral party with no agenda, corroborating everything Daniel has said. Add that to the medical evidence and the recordings, and Victoria's story falls apart. What about her accusations against me? The tech flow situation? We're not going to pretend it didn't happen, but we're going to make sure the judge understands that whatever you did in business has no bearing on your fitness as a father. Your business ethics and your parenting are separate issues. Victoria's trying to conflate them, but we won't let her. Over the next few days, more people came forward. Daniel's teacher, Mrs. Chen, provided a statement describing how Daniel had changed over the past year. He used to be bright and engaged, she wrote, but over the past several months he became withdrawn. He fell asleep in class multiple times. He looked thin and unwell. Once I saw him taking crackers from the classroom snack bin and hiding them in his backpack. When I asked if he was hungry, he became frightened and begged me not to tell his stepmother. I reported my concerns to the school counselor, but I don't know if any action was taken. The school counselor, when contacted, admitted she'd made notes about Daniel's concerning behavior, but had been reassured by Victoria during a parent conference that everything was fine at home. Mrs. Mitchell was very convincing, the counselor said. She explained that Daniel was going through behavioral issues related to his mother's passing, and that they were working with professionals. She asked me not to bother Mr. Mitchell with these concerns, because he was dealing with tremendous work stress. I should have pushed harder. I should have insisted on speaking with Mr. Mitchell directly. Even the gardener, Marco, who came twice a week to maintain the grounds, had a story to tell. I saw the boy Daniel crying in the garden sometimes. Once I asked if he was okay. He said he was fine, but he looked scared. Another time, I saw through the window that he was locked in a room, pounding on the door. I thought maybe it was normal, how rich people discipline their kids. I didn't know. I should have known. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle, creating a picture of systematic isolation and abuse. Victoria had been careful to hide her actions from Jonathan, but she hadn't counted on how many other eyes had seen fragments of the truth. The Child Protective Services investigation progressed. Jennifer Martinez conducted multiple home visits, observing Jonathan's interactions with Daniel, noting the boy's increasing comfort and security. She interviewed Daniel several more times, and her reports consistently supported the conclusion that the child had been neglected and abused. The change in Daniel's demeanor is remarkable, Jennifer wrote in one report. In the presence of his father, he appears relaxed and happy. He smiles, laughs, and engages in age-appropriate play. He eats regular meals without fear or restriction. The contrast to his previous withdrawn and anxious state is striking. But Victoria's legal team wasn't backing down. They filed motions challenging the medical evidence, questioning the credibility of witnesses, suggesting that Jonathan was coaching Daniel to lie. They painted him as a desperate man trying to cover his own failings by scapegoating his innocent wife. This is a classic case of projection, Victoria's attorney argued in court filings. Mr. Mitchell, guilty of serious ethical violations in his business dealings, is attempting to deflect scrutiny by manufacturing allegations against his wife. His sudden interest in parenting only emerged after Mrs. Mitchell discovered his wrongdoing. The timing is suspicious and reveals his true motivations. The media ate it up. The story had everything: Wealth, scandal, accusations of child abuse, corporate espionage, a bitter divorce. Jonathan couldn't go anywhere without being recognized, without seeing whispers and pointing fingers. His company's stock continued to decline. Several major clients suspended their contracts pending the outcome of investigations. But through it all, Jonathan focused on Daniel. They established new routines, new traditions. Friday nights were movie nights, with popcorn and Daniel's choice of film. Saturday mornings were pancake mornings, with Daniel helping to mix the batter and choosing the toppings. Sundays they went to the park or the aquarium, or just for long walks talking about everything and nothing. Daniel was slowly healing. He still had nightmares sometimes, still showed signs of trauma. But he was laughing more, eating more, drawing pictures that showed happiness instead of fear. One evening, as they sat together reading before bed, Daniel looked up at his father with serious eyes. "Daddy, if you lose your company because of me, will you be sad?" Jonathan set down the book and pulled his son close. "First, I'm not losing anything because of you. This is because of choices I made. Second, even if I did lose the company, I wouldn't be sad. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Says, because I'd still have the most important thing in the world. I'd still have you. Companies can be rebuilt. Money can be made again. But you, Danny, you're irreplaceable. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. And no amount of money or success is worth more than you." Daniel hugged him tight, his small arms surprisingly strong. "You're the best daddy ever." As Jonathan held his son, feeling the steady warmth of the child's presence, he realized something profound. He'd spent years chasing success, building an empire, accumulating wealth and power. But this moment, holding his son safe in his arms, was worth more than every deal he'd ever closed. Victoria had tried to use his past mistakes against him, to force him into choosing between his reputation and his son. But she'd misunderstood something fundamental about Jonathan. He wasn't the same man who'd ruthlessly pursued TechFlow. Losing Sarah, almost losing Daniel, had changed him. He'd learned painfully and slowly what really mattered. The hearing to determine Daniel's custody was scheduled for 2 weeks away. The evidence was compiled, the witnesses prepared, the arguments crafted. It would be the culmination of everything they'd fought for. But regardless of what happened in court, Jonathan had already won the only victory that mattered. He had his son back. He was present, engaged, committed. He was the father he should have been all along. Everything else was just details. A week before the hearing, Victoria's legal team filed a motion for supervised visitation. Despite all the evidence, despite the testimony and medical reports, they argued that completely cutting off contact between stepmother and stepson would be harmful to the child. They cited research about attachment and family bonds, painted Victoria as a flawed but loving parent who deserved a chance to maintain her relationship with Daniel. The judge granted the motion. 1 hour of supervised visitation at the courthouse, with a child psychologist present. Jonathan received the notice with a mixture of anger and dread. "Do I have to?" Daniel asked when Jonathan explained what would happen. The boy's face had gone pale, his hands trembling. "The judge says yes. But I'll be right there, just outside the room. The psychologist, Dr. Sarah Williams, will be with you the whole time. Victoria can't hurt you. You're completely safe. But what if she gets mad? Then Dr. Williams will end the visit immediately. And you can leave any time you want. If you feel scared or uncomfortable, you just say the word and we're done." "Okay." Daniel nodded, but his anxiety was palpable. That night he had nightmares again, crying out for his mother. Jonathan held him, soothing him back to sleep, his heart breaking for what his son was about to endure. The day of the supervised visit, they arrived at the courthouse together. Dr. Williams met them in a waiting area. She was a woman in her 40s with a gentle manner and intelligent eyes. "Hi, Daniel," she said, kneeling to his level. "I'm Dr. Sarah. I'm going to be in the room with you the whole time today. My job is to make sure you feel safe and comfortable. If anything bothers you, you tell me immediately, okay?" "Okay," Daniel whispered. "You don't have to hug Mrs. Mitchell if you don't want to. You don't have to sit close to her. You can stand by the door if that makes you feel better. This is all about what makes you comfortable. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded, his hand gripping Jonathan's tightly. When Victoria arrived, she looked different. Less polished than usual, her makeup understated, her clothing modest. It was another calculated choice, Jonathan realized. She was trying to look sympathetic, maternal, unthreatening. Jonathan watched through a one-way mirror as Daniel entered the visitation room with Dr. Williams. The room was designed to be non-threatening, with comfortable furniture, toys, and games. Victoria sat in an armchair, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. "Hello, Daniel," she said softly. "It's good to see you." Daniel stood near the door, as far from Victoria as possible. He didn't respond. "How have you been? Are you doing well in school?" Still no response. Daniel's body language was rigid, defensive. Victoria tried a different approach. "I've missed you. I know things have been confusing and scary, but I want you to know that I care about you very much." "No, you don't," Daniel said suddenly, his voice small but clear. "You don't care about me. You said I was a burden. You said you couldn't wait to be rid of me." Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment. "I was angry when I said that." "I didn't mean it." "You meant it. You always meant it." Daniel's voice was getting stronger. "You locked me in the closet. You didn't give me food when I was hungry. You hurt me. I was trying to teach you discipline. I know it was hard, but it was for your own good." "Hurting kids is never for their own good," Daniel said, and Jonathan recognized his own words being repeated. "That's what Daddy says. He says adults who hurt kids have problems, and it's not the kids' fault." Dr. Williams was taking notes, her expression remaining neutral but supportive. She moved slightly closer to Daniel, a subtle gesture of protection. Victoria tried to reach out her hand toward Daniel. "Please, sweetheart, can we just talk? Can we try to work this out?" Daniel stepped back, pressing against the wall. "I don't want to work it out. I don't want to be near you. You scare me. I know I made mistakes, but I'm willing to change. Doesn't that mean something?" "No," Daniel's voice was firm. "Because you didn't want to change when it mattered. You only want to change now because Daddy found out." The honesty of a 7-year-old, unfiltered and devastating. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but they seemed less genuine than calculated. Another performance. "Do you have any happy memories of our time together?" Victoria asked, her voice quavering. "Any moments when you felt loved?" Daniel thought about it, his face scrunched in concentration. Then he shook his head. "No, I was always scared. Even when you were being nice, I was scared because I knew it wouldn't last. I knew I'd do something wrong and you'd get mad again." Dr. Williams spoke for the first time. "Daniel, can you tell me about a time when you felt scared?" "All the times, but especially the closet times. She'd lock me in there and I couldn't see anything. And I got so hungry and my legs hurt from sitting and I would cry, but nobody came. Sometimes I thought maybe she forgot about me and I'd be there forever." "How long were you usually in the closet?" "I don't know. Hours? It felt like forever." Victoria interjected. "I never left him for more than 30 minutes. He's exaggerating." "No, I'm not." Daniel's voice rose. "It was hours. I counted. I sang songs to myself to try to keep track of time. Sometimes the sun would be in one place when you put me in, and in a different place when you let me out." Dr. Williams made more notes. "Daniel, did anyone else know about the closet punishments?" "No, she only did it when Daddy was gone. She was always nice when Daddy was home. But then he'd leave and she'd change. She'd get mean." "Did you try to tell anyone?" "I tried to tell the housekeeper, Maria, but Victoria caught me and said if I told anyone else, she'd make sure I never saw Daddy again. She said she'd tell everyone I was a bad kid, and they'd send me away to a place for bad kids." Victoria's composure was slipping. "I never said that. He's making this up to turn everyone against me. I'm not making it up. I have recordings." Daniel looked at Dr. Williams. "I recorded myself on an old tablet. I was scared and alone and I didn't know what else to do." This was news to Victoria. Her face paled. "Recordings?" "Yes," Dr. Williams said calmly. "The recordings have been provided to the court as evidence. They corroborate Daniel's account." The room fell silent. Victoria stared at Daniel, and for the first time Jonathan saw genuine emotion cross her face. Was it anger, regret, fear of exposure? It was hard to tell. "Is there anything else you'd like to say to Daniel?" Dr. Williams asked Victoria. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it again. Whatever she'd been about to say, she thought better of it. "No," she said finally. "I think we're done here. Daniel, do you want to continue this visit or would you like to leave?" Dr. Williams asked. "I want to leave, please." Dr. Williams nodded and stood, gesturing for Daniel to follow her to the door. The boy practically ran out, straight into Jonathan's arms. "You were so brave," Jonathan whispered, holding his son close. "So incredibly brave." Daniel was shaking but not crying. He'd faced his abuser and spoken his truth. Jonathan had never been more proud. Dr. Williams joined them a moment later, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Mitchell, I'll be filing a report with the court. Based on what I observed today, I don't believe continued visitation would be in Daniel's best interest. The child shows clear signs of trauma related to Mrs. Mitchell, and forcing contact would likely be harmful." "Thank you," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. As they left the courthouse, Daniel looked up at his father. "I don't have to see her again, do I?" "Not if you don't want to." "I promise." That evening, Robert called with an update. "Dr. Williams's report is strong. She's recommending no further contact between Daniel and Victoria. Combined with everything else we have, this case is looking very solid." "What about Victoria? How's she reacting?" "Badly. Her attorney called today suggesting we might want to settle. Drop the abuse allegations in exchange for a quick divorce and minimal custody dispute." "What did you say?" "I said we'd consider it if Victoria agrees to zero custody, zero visitation, and covers her own legal fees. She won't get a penny more than what the prenup specifies, which is basically nothing beyond the separation clause. And if she doesn't agree, then we go to court and let the judge decide. But John, between you and me, I think she's starting to realize she's lost. The evidence is overwhelming. She's not going to get custody of Daniel, and the more this plays out publicly, the worse she looks." The days leading up to the hearing were tense. Jonathan prepared his testimony with Robert, going over every detail, every potential question. They compiled binders of evidence, medical reports, photographs, witness statements, the recordings from Daniel's tablet, school records, everything that painted a picture of systematic abuse and neglect. Daniel seemed lighter somehow, as if confronting Victoria had released something that had been weighing him down. He started drawing again, not the dark, frightening images of before, but pictures of dinosaurs and spaceships and dragons. He played more, laughed more, asked for friends to come over for playdates. Mrs. Chen, his teacher, sent a note home. "The change in Daniel has been remarkable. He's engaged in class, participating, smiling. Whatever you're doing, Mr. Mitchell, keep doing it. You've given that boy his childhood back." The night before the hearing, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. His grief after Sarah's passing, his retreat into work, his blindness to Victoria's true nature, his failure to protect his son, but also his eventual awakening, his decision to fight, his choice to put Daniel first, no matter the cost. The TechFlow scandal had indeed cost him. His board had forced him to step down as CEO, though he retained his position as chairman and majority shareholder. Several business relationships had been damaged, perhaps irreparably. His reputation in the tech world had taken a serious hit, but he'd gained something far more valuable. He'd gained his son's trust, his love, his presence. He'd gained the knowledge that when it really mattered, he'd made the right choice. Around midnight, Daniel appeared in his doorway again, clutching his stuffed bear. "Can't sleep? Nervous about tomorrow? Come here." Daniel climbed into bed and Jonathan held him close, feeling the steady rhythm of his son's breathing. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Jonathan said softly, "you're safe. You're loved. Nothing is going to change that." "I know," Daniel whispered, "because you promised and you keep your promises now." Now the word held so much weight. An acknowledgement that Jonathan had broken promises before, had failed to be present. But also hope that he was different now, better now, worthy of trust. "I keep my promises now," Jonathan agreed, "and I always will. That's my promise to you." As Daniel drifted to sleep, Jonathan stared at the ceiling, preparing himself for what tomorrow would bring. The hearing would be difficult, emotional, possibly traumatic. But they would face it together. And whatever the judge decided, Jonathan knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never stop fighting for his son. Never stop protecting him. Never stop being the father Daniel deserved. The empire might be crumbling, but the family he was rebuilding would stand firm. That was all that mattered. The courthouse stood imposing against a grey October sky, its columns and granite facade suggesting permanence and authority. Jonathan held Daniel's hand as they climbed the steps, Robert Carson walking beside them with a briefcase full of evidence. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Jonathan had expected, more intimate. Judge Margaret Harrison presided, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes but a stern demeanor. She'd built her reputation on protecting children, on cutting through manipulation and seeing the truth. Victoria sat with her attorney across the aisle, her posture perfect, her expression carefully composed. She'd dressed conservatively, a grey suit that suggested respectability. But Jonathan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped each other tightly in her lap. The hearing began with opening statements. Robert laid out their case methodically. The discovery of Daniel eating dog food, the medical evidence of malnutrition and bruising, the witness testimonies, the recordings, the supervised visitation disaster. He painted a picture of systematic abuse by a calculating stepmother who'd isolated her victim and exploited her husband's absence. Victoria's attorney, Karen Blackwell, countered with a narrative of an overwhelmed stepmother dealing with a challenging child and an absent father. She suggested that Jonathan's sudden interest in parenting was motivated by guilt and a desire to deflect from his own business scandals. She portrayed Victoria as imperfect but well-meaning, arguing that mistakes in parenting didn't constitute abuse. Then came the evidence presentation. Dr. Patterson testified about Daniel's medical condition, showing photographs of his emaciated frame, pointing to bruising patterns consistent with restraint. She described the 15-pound weight loss as medically significant and concerning. "This isn't a case of a picky eater," Dr. Patterson stated firmly. "This is a child who was systematically deprived of adequate nutrition. The weight loss, combined with the bruising and the psychological indicators, points to deliberate neglect and abuse." Maria Rodriguez took the stand next, her testimony powerful in its honesty. She described finding Daniel eating berries from the ground, hearing him cry while locked in his room, being threatened when she tried to intervene. Her voice broke as she apologized directly to Jonathan. "I should have spoken up sooner. I was afraid for my job, for my family. But there is no excuse for silence in the face of a child's suffering. I am sorry. I am so sorry." Mrs. Chen testified about Daniel's deterioration at school, the falling asleep in class, the hoarding of snacks, the withdrawal from peers. He was a different child this year. Anxious, tired, hungry. "I reported my concerns, but they were dismissed. I wish I had pushed harder." The school counselor corroborated this, admitting she'd been manipulated by Victoria's assurances that everything was fine. Then came the recordings. The courtroom fell silent as Daniel's small voice filled the space, begging for food, crying in his locked closet, pleading for his father. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as she listened. Victoria's attorney objected, arguing the recordings were inadmissible, but Judge Harrison overruled. These recordings were made by the child about his own experiences. "They're absolutely relevant and admissible. Continue." Recording after recording played, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Jonathan watched Victoria's face, seeing her mask crack further with each piece of evidence. Several people in the courtroom were openly crying by the time the recordings finished. Dr. Williams testified about the supervised visitation, describing Daniel's clear fear and trauma response to Victoria's presence. The child showed all the signs of someone facing their abuser: rigid body language, defensive positioning, inability to identify any positive memories. In my professional opinion, continued contact with Mrs. Mitchell would be psychologically harmful to Daniel. Finally, it was time for Daniel's testimony. Judge Harrison had arranged for it to be given in her chambers, a smaller, less intimidating space. Only the judge, the attorneys, a court reporter, and Dr. Williams were present. Jonathan was allowed to wait just outside the door. Through the thin walls, Jonathan could hear fragments of the conversation. Daniel's voice, steadier than Jonathan would have thought possible, answering questions. Yes, he'd been locked in the closet. Yes, he'd been deprived of food. Yes, he'd been hit and grabbed hard enough to leave bruises. Yes, he'd been afraid every day. No, he didn't want to see Victoria again, ever. When Daniel emerged 20 minutes later, his face was pale but composed. He'd done it. He'd told his truth to the person who mattered most. Judge Harrison reconvened the court and turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Mitchell, would you like to testify on your own behalf?" Victoria conferred with her attorney, then stood. "Yes, Your Honor." She took the stand, was sworn in, and began her testimony. She denied the abuse, claimed the punishments were reasonable discipline, insisted she loved Daniel and only wanted what was best for him. But Robert's cross-examination was brutal. He played the recordings again, asking Victoria to reconcile her claim of love with the sounds of a terrified child. He brought up the seafood risotto despite Daniel's known allergy. He asked about the dismissed staff, the isolation of witnesses, the careful timing of abuse to coincide with Jonathan's absences. Mrs. Mitchell, you said you loved Daniel. Can you name one activity you did with him, purely for his enjoyment? One playdate you arranged? One moment when you put his happiness before your need for control? Victoria couldn't answer. Her composure was crumbling, her voice rising defensively. That child was impossible, ungrateful, difficult. I tried everything, but nothing was good enough for him. So you locked him in a closet without food? I was trying to teach him consequences. By starving him, by isolating him, by making him so hungry he ate dog food. He was exaggerating. He was manipulating you all. He's a liar. The outburst hung in the air. Victoria seemed to realize what she'd said, how it sounded. She tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. Robert pressed further. Mrs. Mitchell, when you married Jonathan Mitchell, did you know about his son's trust fund? The substantial amount left to Daniel by his late mother. I don't see how that's relevant. Please answer the question. Yes, I knew. It's not a secret. And you asked Jonathan multiple times about the terms of that trust, didn't you? About when Daniel would gain access? About the amounts involved? I was simply trying to understand the family's financial situation, or trying to assess what you stood to gain. Robert pulled out documents. According to the prenuptial agreement you insisted upon, you receive very little in a divorce. But if you had gained custody of Daniel, you would have controlled his household, his daily expenses, potentially influenced decisions about his trust. Victoria's attorney objected, but Judge Harrison allowed the line of questioning. I wasn't after his money, Victoria insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Then what were you after? Because it certainly wasn't a relationship with a 7-year-old child. The question hung unanswered. Victoria's testimony concluded shortly after, her credibility in tatters. Judge Harrison called for closing arguments. Robert summarized the evidence, the overwhelming pattern of abuse and neglect. Karen Blackwell made a final attempt to portray Victoria sympathetically, but even she seemed to realize the case was lost. I'll take this matter under advisement, Judge Harrison said. However, given the severity of the evidence and Daniel's clear wishes, I'm issuing a temporary order granting sole custody to Mr. Mitchell, with no visitation rights for Mrs. Mitchell, pending my final decision. Court is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Jonathan knelt in front of Daniel, taking his son's hands in his own. You were so brave in there, buddy. So incredibly brave. Is it over? Almost. The judge has to make her final decision. But for now, yes, you're safe. You're with me. And that's not going to change. Daniel threw his arms around his father's neck, holding tight. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, son. More than anything. 2 weeks later, Judge Harrison issued her final ruling. Sole custody to Jonathan Mitchell. Permanent restraining order against Victoria. No visitation, no contact. The marriage was dissolved, with Victoria receiving only what the prenup specified. A small separation payment, and none of the assets she'd hoped to gain. Additionally, the judge had referred Victoria's actions to the district attorney's office for potential charges. While Victoria wasn't going to face formal charges for the abuse, she was now marked in the system. Her reputation was destroyed, her social standing in Greenwich obliterated. Jonathan's own reputation remained tarnished by the TechFlow scandal, but he found he cared less than he'd expected. Some business relationships were irreparable, some doors permanently closed. But others saw how he'd fought for his son, how he'd chosen family over fortune and respected him for it. He sold the Greenwich mansion, the place that held too many bad memories. He bought a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood, a place with a big backyard and a treehouse, and neighbors with kids Daniel's age. It was a fraction of the size of the mansion, but it felt more like a home than that marble mausoleum ever had. Maria Rodriguez came back as their housekeeper, but also as an extended family member. She fussed over Daniel making his favorite foods, listening to his stories about school, treating him with the grandmother-like affection he'd been missing. Jonathan restructured his work life completely. He remained chairman of his company, but hired a new CEO to handle day-to-day operations. He worked from home 3 days a week, attended every school event, coached Daniel's soccer team. He was present in a way he'd never been before. Daniel thrived. With therapy, proper nutrition, and consistent love, he transformed. The anxious, frightened child gave way to a happy, confident boy. He made friends, joined activities, brought home report cards full of praise from teachers. The nightmares became less frequent, then rare, then stopped altogether. One evening, about 6 months after the trial, Jonathan found Daniel drawing at the kitchen table. He looked over his son's shoulder and saw a picture of a house with 2 stick figures labeled "Me and Dad," a sun overhead, flowers in the garden, a dog playing in the yard. "That's a beautiful picture. Buddy, it's our house," Daniel explained. "It's happy. It is happy. We're happy. Are you happy, Danny?" Daniel thought about it seriously, then nodded. "Yes, I'm happy now. I wasn't before, but I am now." Such simple words, but they meant everything. Jonathan had lost his CEO position, damaged his business reputation, spent hundreds of thousands on legal fees, and sold his mansion. But he'd gained his son's happiness, his trust, his love. It was the best trade he'd ever made. As autumn turned to winter and then to spring, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. They had pizza Fridays and game nights and Sunday morning pancakes. They planted a garden together, adopted a rescue dog named Buddy, and built model rockets that they launched in the park. Jonathan taught Daniel about business, but also about ethics, about how the pursuit of success meant nothing if it came at the cost of your integrity. He was open about his past mistakes, using them as teaching moments. "I did some things I'm not proud of," he told Daniel one day. "I hurt people in business because I thought success was the most important thing. But you know what I learned?" "What?" "That success without character is worthless. The only things that really matter are the people you love and the way you treat them. Everything else is just noise." Daniel absorbed these lessons, asked thoughtful questions, grew into a boy who was both ambitious and compassionate, confident but kind. The last Jonathan heard of Victoria, she'd left Connecticut entirely, moved somewhere out west. She'd tried to give interviews claiming she was the real victim, but nobody was interested. Her reputation followed her, and doors that had once been open slammed shut. Jonathan didn't hate her, though Daniel's therapist said that would be natural. He felt something closer to pity. Victoria had been so consumed with status and wealth that she'd destroyed any chance at genuine connection. She'd had the opportunity to love a wonderful child and had chosen cruelty instead. She'd had the chance at a real family and had chosen manipulation. The losses were hers far more than theirs. 2 years after the trial, on a warm May afternoon, Jonathan sat on their back porch watching Daniel play with Buddy in the yard. His son was 9 now, taller, stronger, confident. He laughed as the dog chased him around the garden, his face full of pure, uncomplicated joy. Jonathan's phone rang. It was an old business colleague, someone who distanced himself during the scandal. "Jonathan, it's Martin. I wanted to reach out, apologize for going silent during all that mess. I've been following your story, and I have to say I'm impressed. What you did for your son, the way you fought for him, that took real courage. I was wondering if you'd be interested in discussing a potential partnership. I have a venture that could use your expertise, but more than that, your integrity. I know what you're really made of now, and that's what I need." Jonathan watched Daniel cartwheel across the lawn, heard his son's laughter floating on the breeze. "Martin, I appreciate the call. Can you send me the details? I'll look them over, but I have to tell you up front, my son comes first, always. If this partnership requires the kind of hours and travel I used to do, I'm not interested." "I expected you'd say that. It's why I called you. I want someone who has their priorities straight. Send me your terms, Jonathan. I think we can make this work." After hanging up, Jonathan smiled. The world was changing, or maybe he was changing, or maybe both. Success was being redefined, not as the accumulation of wealth and power, but as the building of character and relationships. His empire had been smaller now, more focused, more ethical. He'd cleaned house in his company, implemented new oversight, made amends where possible for past wrongs. It would take years to fully rebuild his reputation, but he was doing it the right way this time, with transparency and integrity. Daniel ran up to the porch, breathless and grinning. "Dad, can Marcus come over for a sleepover this weekend?" "Absolutely. Should we make pizza or tacos?" "Both it is." As Daniel ran back to play, Jonathan felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what mattered. Not boardrooms or stock prices or magazine covers. This a happy child playing in a safe home with a father who was present and engaged. He'd learned the hardest lesson of his life, that you can have all the success in the world and still be a failure at what matters most. But he'd also learned that it's never too late to change, to choose differently, to rebuild from the rubble of your mistakes. Victoria had tried to destroy him, had exposed his business sins and attempted to take his son. In doing so, she'd inadvertently given him the greatest gift of all. She'd forced him to confront his choices, to evaluate his priorities, to become the man and father he was meant to be. For that, in a strange way, he was almost grateful. As the sun set over their backyard, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jonathan called Daniel inside for dinner. They sat together at the kitchen table, laughing and talking about their day, making plans for the weekend, just a father and son building memories that would last a lifetime. No mansions, no staff, no displays of wealth. Just love, presence, and the quiet joy of a safe home where a child never had to be afraid again. It was everything.